It's been beautiful, beautiful to now be where I am, living in that rhythm and seeing what my life used to be like. And I'm getting choked up as I say that because that life, I never want to be there again.
Welcome to the Rhythm Restoration Podcast, the show rooted in scripture and scientific research, where you will learn to achieve maximum success in your business and personal life by actually working less hours. You will conquer burnout, find your purpose, restore your passion, and be more productive than ever. If you think it's too good to be true, it's not. It's exactly how God designed our bodies. And the science of our rhythms has actually been around for over 7 decades. But no one has ever looked at it through a biblical lens until now. Hi, I'm your host, Liz Bagwell, a published scientist turned healthcare executive, wife and mom of 3, who burned out at the top and found my purpose at rock bottom. Follow along with me as I leave everything behind in pursuit of helping others restore God's design for their personal lives and businesses. This will be raw, the good, the bad, and the ugly of what it's like when you stop running and start living in pursuit of what truly matters. Together, you'll cultivate a more balanced, joy-filled life, gaining the peace and freedom only found when leaning into God's design for your mind, body, heart, and soul.
Welcome to episode 3. What is rhythm part 2? This is what we call in the podcast world a bite-sized episode. So if you recall, last episode was quite a bit longer. This is going to be the last episode that I'll launch with, and we'll continue to have weekly episodes going further. As I started to prepare for this episode, I went back and I looked at my journals and I looked back at my notes, all the scribbles I made as I was reviewing the scientific research papers and just really learning about this, diving headfirst. And it's been beautiful, beautiful to now be where I am, living in that rhythm and seeing what my life used to be like. And I'm getting choked up as I say that because that life, I never want to be there again. And it's not because of anything outside of myself that was terrible, because I have such an amazing life. I have an amazing family who loves me so much and 3 beautiful children. I am honest to goodness so blessed, more than I ever thought I could be. And I was going to save this for a later episode, but I just want to be real and tell you that I have not lived an easy life. So it may sound up to this point, although just the little information that I've given about mental illness in my family and addiction through my mom, that I had things easy or that there were times that things were given to me. And that is simply not true. There were times that growing up, I was homeless. So many people didn't know that. I was prom queen, but little did people know that there were times throughout my life during that time that I was homeless. I just had this outside facade that everything was okay. And I think, sometimes it's okay to fake it till you make it, but it eventually is just too much. It's too much. And so I have not lived an easy life, period. But I've lived a beautiful life. And as I sit here and I look at all of the dots, they all connect. And I've seen those circles converge, of when I had all this trauma growing up. And then I had this career and healthcare. And I also have such a passion for helping others. All of these circles are starting to converge. And again, those dots connect. And I see it more from God's view. And I think that you'll start seeing that too. Once you start leaning into his rhythm for your life, I think he's going to start opening things up for you, just like he's done me, for me to go, wow, all of that makes sense. Again, none of it was in vain. I wouldn't change anything because I know, and I have known my entire life, he's using that for good in some way or another. And so I don't want you to sit and listen to this podcast and think this is coming from someone who was born with a silver spoon in her mouth, because I absolutely was not. There were times when I would go without eating. My mom would take our lunch money and she would go buy drugs on the street. That's real talk. And that's so much of my story, but it's not all of my story. But there is trauma there. And that's one of the things that I want to talk about here in a few minutes, about how trauma and how stress affects our rhythms. Because if you've ever been through trauma, you have PTSD, or you've just had really stressful situations, you know what that feels like in your body. And sometimes it can get trapped in our body. And we'll talk about that too in other episodes. But I just wanted to start by being super real and honest, because I don't want anyone hearing this to just think this cannot apply to you because I may not come from the same background you do. And I wanted to level set there, throwing in some work terms. Okay, let's get to these 5 steps to identifying your rhythm. These are based on 2 things. So I have combined both the studying that I've done on all of these research papers, not just the ones that I've mentioned, but several others that I studied for months, as well as my 36 years experience of not living in God's rhythm. Combining those together and working and practicing these steps, I've created really a blueprint for how to identify your rhythm and how to lean into it. And in future episodes, starting next episode, we will be starting a really long series around how to restore it. So these steps are going to help you identify it, and identifying it is great, but how do you restore it? And that's where we're really going to spend a ton of time over the next several weeks and months, is how to restore it. But before we restore it, it's important to identify it first. We got to know, right? We got to begin with the end in mind. We got to know what that goal is. And that's to live into that rhythm. So what's your rhythm? We start by something called chronotyping. So this is a test that was developed and is used in a lot of different settings. It's most commonly used, though, with executives. So there are 2 companies right now that work with high-level executives from places like Apple and IBM, Google, and they always start with chronotyping, from at least what I can gather. And chronotyping is divided into 3 groups. So by taking the chronotype test, you then are bucketed into 3 groups. You're either AM, biphasic, or PM. What that means is your greatest peaks are all going to be either in the morning and then dip off. So imagine they go straight up and then straight down. Or biphasic, up in the morning, down a little bit, up and later in the morning, down a little bit, up in the afternoon, and then down in the evening. And then there's the PM shifters. Those individuals are the ones that are late risers and the night owls. So they don't really get a big start to their cortisol and adrenaline pumping through their bodies until later on in the day. So now that you know that, you kind of understand why I'm a little hesitant when you see some life coaches saying, oh, just work 60 to 90 minutes and then take a break. That's great. But we first need to figure out what your chronotype is. So I will have a link to the chronotype test that the neuroscientist from Cal Berkeley developed, her and her research team. Amazing. The same test is the one that those at Thrive, if you know what Thrive is, Global, or Huffington Post. So Ariana Huffington has taken this test, as well as lots of other folks. So once you take that test, it will then help you to identify, are you AM shifted? Are you biphasic? So again, that's some in the AM, some in the PM. That's where I fall. Or are you PM shifter? So when we think about that distribution, type 1, the AM shifters, Dr. Youssef says they prefer to go to bed early and wake up early. And that's about 20 to 25% of the population. So these people linearly lose their energy throughout the day and are exhausted. The biphasic, so that is where I fall in, that is 50% of the population, so the majority. And they have 2 core energy peaks. So for me personally, my biggest 2 peaks are at 7 a.m. and all the way at 1 in the afternoon. And then I kind of have a little medium peak around 5. Then you have the PM shifters, 20% of the population that prefer to go to bed late and wake up late, like I mentioned earlier. And then they peak later in the day. And you can also be on the fence. And again, I think that what the research has shown is that you can kind of shift back and forth between some of these. Like sometimes I am really just an AM. I'm kind of on that line where I'm like AM shifted, but also PM shifted. And then again, the next step, and that's why I have the second step, is because if you are on that line, or if you go drastically between one or another, or you have a big life event, it's important to be able to do what I call energy mapping. This is not some crazy voodoo thing that I made up. It literally is just mapping out your energy throughout the day, starting with right when you wake up in the morning. And so what you're going to want to do is figure out a system for yourself, and I have my own, that helps you to know when you're at peak energy and when you have low energy. And you are going to start to see trends, even when you're a little off. But sleep is super important here. And we'll, again, talk about that later. So more on energy mapping. I will link some information in my website, on my website, for you to be able to go in and kind of get an idea of what that might look like for yourself. Step 3 is a toolkit build. This is fun. And this is where you can get as big and lively and come up with all kinds of cool things, cool tools for your toolbox, or it can be super plain and basic. These are anything from how you set up your workspace, what your Spotify playlists look like, what your rest preferences are. It really is as big or as little as you want to make it. And I think that as you start to live into your rhythm, once you find it and identify it, and you start living into it, you're going to always be adding to your toolbox. The 4th step is a calendar revamp. So this is really important, but you have to go in this order. So the calendar revamp is revamping your entire calendar based around your energy mapping and your chronotyping. So what that might look like, I'm going to give you an example, and I'm going to use my dad as an example. So my dad's a mechanic, and this is really can go across any discipline. My dad is 65 years old and still works crazy hours, 10 to 12 hours a day, pulling out gigantic transmissions and engines each and every day. He also does easy things, right? Like changes a tire, changes oil. So what I've worked with him on is he probably wants to he's well known for working on vintage cars that nobody else can fix. He probably wants to structure his day so that he is working on those really hard, complex things that take up a lot of both physical energy and brain energy during those peaks where he has those big wave crests, right? And not in the trough where he's literally drained and has to pump extra cortisol and adrenaline through his body. For me, what I did in terms of an example of calendar revamp, so I knew that 7:00 in the morning is a big, big peak for me. So before I knew that, guess what I was doing at 7 a.m.? If I wasn't on a conference call, I was shepherding my children, getting them dressed, making sure they got out the door on time. So once I knew that, I had a discussion with my husband. And since his peak times aren't till a little later in the morning, we swapped. And so he got all the kids. I helped until it was ready for them to go, got them out the door by 7. And then at 7, I was able to sit down and really crank out a lot of work. It's so fun once you start doing it. You're like, wow, this really actually works. And now I will do the same. So now that I am an entrepreneur, I still do the same. At 7 a.m., I'm sitting down, and that's when I do my best, most focused work. Then I have a lull. So if you remember, I talked about, I think in the last episode I talked about how sometimes those 20 to 30 minute breaks are good, but sometimes we need longer. And that's definitely the case for me. So from 8 to 9, I need a whole hour there. And I don't need to necessarily sleep, but I use so much energy going all the way from 7 to 8, from 8 to 9, I've got to rest, or then I am like crapped out for the rest of the morning. Hopefully those were good examples for you. Then planning, like how do you plan your day? This also goes hand in hand with that calendar revamp. So something that I've created is a planner actually working these steps for folks that want a little bit more hands-on and those visual people and the planners, because a lot of us, like myself, I like to write things down. And so I created it for myself and also for you as well. And I'll be going live with that in the next few weeks. But I also want to pause here and say that I know it's not feasible for us to kind of flip that switch because society as well as our lives, again, do not follow that rhythmic pattern. And so what I want to caution you on is don't try to do all of it at one time. Maybe start on a single day. Maybe for you, Fridays are your easiest days where you don't have a ton of meetings, or it's a little bit lighter and you can totally shift the way that you do things. So maybe start with just that one day and trying that one day and seeing how it works. Because even if you just do that one day, guess what? You're still better than where you were yesterday, right? So maybe you set a goal that you want to start doing just Fridays, living into your rhythm, or just Saturday and Sundays, living into your rhythm, trying that way. And then after 6 months, you'll add on another day, and so on and so forth. So think about it like that. Don't try to eat everything at one time. Don't try to boil the ocean, a little bit at a time. And then planning. So being proactive versus reactive. And I know that that is so hard to do and get out of that pattern of being reactive. But, and I'm looking at the time, I said it was going to be a bite size and I'm already at 18 minutes. Whew, I'm sorry. So I'll kind of wrap this up. But in thinking about planning, we want to be proactive versus reactive. And so using tools like in your toolkit and or a planner, whether it be the one that I've created or the one that you love to use, and proactively setting time at the beginning of each week, even maybe before Monday, to map out each and every day for the next week. And again, the planner that I have, I will talk a little bit about that. I'll maybe do like an extra episode just on the planner to talk through how it's different, because it uses all of the things that I had used to help me rise and be successful, but it adds that layer of rhythm to it. And so I had taught this to folks in onboarding for years, and it was hands down one of the top 5 ways that helped me be as successful as I was, as young as I was. And now what I've done is I've just added that layer of rhythm to it. And so it really is a beautiful way of looking at our days and not letting our days run us, and really actually living into the rhythm for that day and making it what God intended it to be. Okay, so those are the 5 steps to finding your rhythm. I'm going to go over them again super quick. 1, chronotyping. So again, that AM shifted, biphasic, or PM shifted. Energy mapping. So that's mapping out energy. It's so important for us to, during that time, to really listen to our bodies. That's one of the things that I'm super grateful for in the 18 plus years that I've been in therapy, is that I've had to learn to listen to my body. And so I was kind of ahead of the curve. And that leads me to something else that I really want to talk about at some point. I need to write this down, but how to use those things such as your trauma, like how to use your trauma responses and all of your coping mechanisms. We can use those as superpowers. And I've done that. That's, again, one of the other things that I've done that has helped me be really successful is I've actually taken those things, those coping strategies, and I've used them for good. An example of that, this is just a little side note here, is that growing up, I had to be extremely emotionally intelligent for my safety, right? I had to know that if the way that my mom walked in to the house, based on her steps, based on the way that she opened the door, the way she was breathing, it would totally change the outlook of how safe or unsafe I was. And so what I've done is I really have this heightened sense of people's emotions, and therefore have been able to harness that and used it to be really emotionally intelligent. And sometimes it comes back and it bites me. But for the most part, I've been able to really hone in on that. And so maybe that'll be an episode that we can do. I can have some guests on who also have done similar things and talk about how we can use some of those coping strategies for good, not just in our work, but in our everyday. Okay, so I think I lost track. Did I even say the rest of the steps? Chronotyping, energy mapping, calendar revamp, and then the planning. So learning to be proactive versus reactive. So usually I will share a pearl of wisdom or a biohack at the end of each episode. But this episode really is just one big giant long list of biohacks. So I hope that that was enough biohacking and experience of my life that you need for this day. Hopefully that was enough to fill you up. But if not, stick around for episode 4. That is going to be Restoration Part 1. So that is going to be going into the science and the scripture of restoring our rhythms and what that looks like. I'm really excited. Thanks for listening.
Did you know that one of the biggest secrets to come out recently, and it's really not even just a secret, it's a true biohack to living a longer life, and this is scientifically proven, because otherwise I would not be saying it, is human connection, that true human connection that we all long for. So let's really connect, and I mean it. I cannot wait to go on this journey with you and help discover and restore your individual rhythm and life. You can find me on Instagram at LizBagwell7 or head on over to my website, rhythmrestoration.co, that's .co, not .com, where I share all things life, family, other biohacks, and simple ways to lean into God's true design for your life. It would mean the world to me if you could share this episode with a friend, family member, or coworker, or all three, and if you left me a review on your favorite podcast app. Thank you truly from the bottom of my heart for listening to the Rhythm Restoration Podcast. All my light and love, Liz.